These two wonderful new attorneys taking over Mumia's case. In the 30th year of his incarceration, when most lawyers don't come near cases, number one, on death row, number two, that have gone through everything up to the Supreme Court with everybody saying no, 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 and even the question of execution being reintroduced. So we are profoundly grateful, but also thrilled that these two strong, extremely competent women who, those of us who were in court and saw them in action, were wowed and said, these are two sisters that we want in charge. And they are in charge of this legal team. So please welcome Judith Ritter and Christina Swans up to the front. Judy Ritter is a professor of law and director of Criminal Defense Clinic at Widener University School of Law's Delaware campus. She has been on the faculty there since 1994. She teaches and writes in the areas of criminal law, criminal procedure, and post-conviction remedies. Professor Ritter is admitted to practice in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and in several federal courts, including the United States Supreme Court. We say this is the new team, but I want to make clear, and Mumia makes this clear all the time, these two women have been involved before. They're not new to this team, okay? They're new to being in charge of the team, that's right, which makes a big difference. She has been presenting the arguments pertaining to instructions given to the jury that sentenced Mumia to death. Whether or not he gets resentenced to death or not depends on these arguments. So she's had a very critical role and continues to have a very critical role.
You know, I know that I saw many of you in the courtroom in Philadelphia, both in 2007 for the first oral argument in the federal appeals, and then again in just 2010, this past November. And many more of you were outside the courtroom, outside the courthouse, drawing attention to what was happening inside, supporting all of us, and working so hard. And all of you have been working, whether you've been in Philadelphia or you've been in New York or you've been all around the world, working so tirelessly for Mumia. And I just want you to know that we appreciate this enormously, and we recognize how hard and how much time and money and energy and emotion you've all put in to keeping this case alive, keeping Mumia alive, and for keeping it in our memories and keeping it current, this trial that happened so long ago now, that was so unfair and so unjust, and keeping it in our minds and not letting the world forget about it. And that's really thanks to all of you and so many others. Just going to say a little bit about the status of the legal claims. And unfortunately, it's not very good news, the status of the legal claims, and I think that many of you know that. The efforts to win Mumia a new trial, because the trial that was held was so full of constitutional violations, was so full of constitutional violations. But the effort to win him a new trial, the efforts in state court, in federal court, lower courts, appellate courts, have essentially been rejected by those courts, one by one, over a number of years of efforts by not me, I've only been working on part of it, but of many, many lawyers and many activists. So what could happen? Well, there are a number of things that could happen. If the Third Circuit reaffirms its earlier opinion, then I think the district attorney will ask the Supreme Court to look at it again. They may or may not be successful, but I think they will ask. And then, depending, of course, upon what happens there, at some point, the district attorney's office, we anticipate, although it's their choice to make, will seek a new penalty trial. Will seek to have a new death sentence implemented by a new jury. Because setting aside the death penalty, while it was a big, important victory, of course, just means that they can try again and instruct the jury properly. So that's something that could develop as we go forward. Of course, it's the Third Circuit, which, by the way, a lot of people ask me, well, do you know when they're going to decide? And I don't. But it could be tomorrow, and it could be weeks or months from now. I don't know. But if they decide, if they change their minds and they say, no, we don't think the death penalty should have been set aside. We think it was okay and it should remain. Well, we can go to the U.S. Supreme Court and ask the U.S. Supreme Court to review that decision. And then, again, depending on what happens there, we go back to the federal lower court because there were a number of bases for the setting aside of the death penalty that judge just didn't reach because we won on the one claim. So we'll go back there if we're unfortunately in that position. So there's plenty of litigation yet to come with regard to the death penalty, but I think that I know that you know, and I hope you'll let people know that this is still very much a death penalty case. Mumia has retained LDF. Christina and I have seen him a lot recently, and I can tell you, I talk to him on the phone regularly, and we've seen him. He is very, very comforted by this. He's very pleased, grateful. He doesn't like to dwell on himself much at all. It's unbelievably amazing, but he doesn't. But he is very, very relieved that the case is in the hands of this new team. And the Criminal Justice Project of LDF, headed by Christina Swarns, who I've known for a long time, will be taking the lead in the case. And they are not new. As Suzanne said, they are not new to this case. Christina argued the issue of jury selection discrimination several years ago brilliantly. And she and her co-workers wrote an amicus brief, a friend to the court brief then. That was an excellent, excellent brief. But that was a different role. And this role is much more central to what we're doing. They are, joining the defense, and they are lending their amazing staff, the staff of the Criminal Justice Project, lawyers, organizers. It's such a pleasure to be working with them. And they were a bunch of smart, energetic, committed, tireless lawyers. And this is really, truly wonderful, wonderful news for this case. So I think I'm going to let Christina tell you a little bit more about them. And thank you again for having this wonderful event. Thank you.
It really is an honor to be here with all of you this evening. I have to tell you that I have been representing people on death row, I was trying to remember, and I'm just going to admit it, for 15 years now. I've represented people on death row in Pennsylvania, in Texas, in Arkansas. We have cases in Alabama. We work all over the South. 95% of the time it is, as you can imagine, an isolating experience for us to go into the South and advocate on behalf of African American men who have been charged and condemned to die by the government. We walk into courtrooms, we aren't often welcome. We don't get quite the kind of response we got today. So you'll give me a moment to appreciate this is something I have to take in. So it is absolutely my honor to be with all of you tonight. I have to echo Judy's sentiment that we are really here, and we have no doubt in our minds, because of you all. And we do stand on the shoulders of giants, and the giants in this movement and in this case are in this room. And so I want to thank all of you for all of the work that you have done for 30 years in keeping this case alive and in keeping Mumia alive. So I first want to extend my thanks from the legal team and from the Legal Defense Fund to all of you. Thank you so much. It is absolutely my honor to represent Mumia Abu-Jamal. It is my pleasure, it is my honor to have that opportunity. And there's no question in my mind, there's no question in the mind of anyone at the Legal Defense Fund that the justice system has utterly and completely failed Mumia Abu-Jamal. And in our view, that has everything to do with race. And that is why the Legal Defense Fund is in this case. LDF was founded in 1940 with one express and clear mission that holds as applicable today as it did in 1940. And that is to achieve racial justice, equality, and an inclusive society. That struggle is as important and as alive today as it was in 1940. We began as an arm, the legal arm of the NAACP. Our first director counsel was Thurgood Marshall, who, as you all know, went on to become the first African-American Supreme Court Justice of the United States. LDF is best known, I think, for having been the lawyers who brought integration, school desegregation, to this country in a case called Brown versus Board of Education. But what I want you to know is that this organization has, since its inception, been dedicated to the elimination of racial discrimination in the criminal justice system. We are, by our founding, an organization that is committed to the abolition of the death penalty. We are acutely aware that the injustices of the criminal justice system are inextricably bound up in race. And so since the beginning, LDF has been doing criminal justice work. Thurgood Marshall himself went into the South and represented African American men who were charged with rape of white women in the South, and as you all know, that was, for that time, it would mean automatically a death sentence, if not a lynching. So we have been fighting this fight since we started. We are now completely separate from the NAACP. We are two entirely independent organizations. We have been separate since 1957, so it's not news. But we have two totally unrelated boards, everything, staff, totally unrelated. But LDF, I just want you to understand, has been in this fight and is committed to this fight for racial justice in the United States and in criminal justice. LDF brought the the only successful constitutional challenge to the death penalty in 1972 in a case called Furman versus Georgia. It was our office that temporarily ended the death penalty in 1972. Thank you. It was LDF that brought the only significant challenge to the broad, destructive role of race in the death penalty in 1986. We brought a case called McCleskey versus Kemp, where we said, we have shown by statistical evidence that black men are more likely than any other race, black men who kill white women are more likely than any other combination of race of defendant and race of victim to receive the death penalty. That means that race, it's not the crime, it's not the victim, it's not anything else that's happening here. It is race that is deciding who lives and who dies.